order. I have one disclosure of pecuniary interest before me for Councillor Wells, Committee of the Whole, March 21st, closed session item 6.5, compensation review, relative impacted by compensation review. If at some point throughout the meeting anyone else has a conflict, please declare it at that time. Unfinished business, we have none. New business, we have the proposed new business licensing bylaw. Do you want to, are you dealing with that, or are we going to have staff? And we'll join us at the table. Who's starting? Are you starting, or are they?
I can.
Okay.
Thank you, Council. We've made a few changes based on some direction we got at the last meeting. And we made those changes rather quickly because the agenda was due the next day. So we need to go through some of those things and make additional changes. We've also gotten some advice and recommendations from our prosecutor, as well as we consulted zoning. So we have a few changes to make that we'd like to go through first, and then we'll open it up to questions. So that'll leave it to Emily, and if she needs clarification, I'm here.
Okay. Through your worship, I would like to address the definitions for the first one. We would like to add a definition as in for the appeals committee, just to further define what they are, and they will fall under the property standards committee. Another wording issue is under the issuer of licenses to also include the authority to suspend and revoke business license, just falling under that definition. In regards to the appeals procedure, we want to remove the wording recommendation and just put straightforward to suspend or revoke a business license as opposed to recommending to do so. And then to change the written request from the CAO to the clerk.
Does anyone have questions on any of those items? So, Madam Clerk, do we have to do anything to our motion to do that?
No, if we can just gain acceptance, we'll make the changes based on our discussion today, and we'll bring it forward at the March 26th council meeting, and the explanatory note in front of it will show the changes that were made.
Okay, Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Worship. Just questioning the food vehicle schedule, now including parking spots in the main beach area where they were not allowed before. Is that correct? So we are going to allow them now?
For your worship, we want to respectfully request to remove that section underneath that schedule, as we feel that that sort of provision should be under this type of bylaw. It should be discussed once a food vendor becomes available and asked to be within the town of Wasaga Beach. In regards to that, because of the parking lots, there's a bunch of, it's not feasible, and the staff within the municipal law enforcement department has agreed that this isn't the correct way to state this requirement. We've received feedback from the zoning department as well, as they're not fully prepared to provide this type of service as well. And there's also significant revenue loss for the town of Wasaga Beach. If we loan out the 4 spaces permitted for a food vehicle, we'd be looking at a $7,200 revenue loss for 4 months.
Councillor Watson.
Okay, no, I'm just, I guess, a little confused. It appears that we're allowing it there, so we're saying we're not going to allow them in those areas. My understanding was we had a sort of lines drawn around and food vehicles weren't to go there. This reads to me that we are allowing. So is this going to be part of what we're voting on for the bylaw, or that's coming out of it?
Through your worship, I would like to be respectfully requested to remove it. This section was added after our last council meeting on behalf of Deputy Mayor Gray's proposal to allow them near the beachfront area. After reviewing it with our prosecutor and as well as the zoning department afterwards, we've come to the conclusion that it's not impossible, but it's not possible as of right now.
Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, sure. Through your worship, it is problematic to to be in this bylaw. What we would do is similar to what CAO is doing with negotiating a lease agreement. We would have to look at that on a case-by-case basis rather than put it in this bylaw because of the significant revenue loss, and also because of the zoning provisions regarding having to have a structure on site in order to do that. So there are a number of things that we would have to look at. Regarding the streets, zoning, those are there because of zoning and because of space issues and because of liability with safety of having people on the streets. So there are reasons for that. So the zoning bylaw review could bring up some of those changes, as well as the changes that we would look at with short-term rentals. So once the zoning bylaw comes forward, then we can make additional changes to the business licensing bylaw. But that particular section, I didn't review. We didn't have much time because Thursday the agenda was due, so it was thrown in there, but I didn't review it. So we've reviewed it afterwards and find that it's not really applicable or appropriate to put in this bylaw.
Okay, Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Worship. Just last point, I'm glad to hear we're taking it out now. The initial reason for not allowing them there is to not compete with the bricks and mortar and people paying taxes, to keep that area there. And at this point, I'm still not in agreement of allowing them down there, but we can discuss that.
Okay, Councillor Foster.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Your Worship. It's not related to that. It's if I can.
Okay, I think Deputy Mayor Braze was, so we'll go to that.
Thank you.
Okay. So my initial comment at the last meeting was, why do we have a restricted area? I don't think that should be part of a bylaw. So I was surprised to see it coming back to saying, hey, no, we're going to allow them because we've never had that discussion. So I think we may jump 2 steps ahead, but I still question the need for a restricted area.
I would agree with you. If council would like to remove that map, I think we could do that, and then put some wording in there that it must adhere to the zoning requirements. Would that suffice, or do you agree with that, Jeff?
Yeah, sure. Through Your Worship, I would agree with that as well. As long as it's predominantly the safety concern is more or less on on streets. If it's private property within a specific area and it meets the zoning requirements, I don't see an issue with imposing restrictions, but allowing them. So that is an option to look at.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that would better address kind of my concern.
Yes.
Thank you.
Is that on this topic, Councillor? Okay, go ahead.
Well, I guess I can see how that rolls out going forward. I'm of the same view, I think, as Councillor Watson, that with respect to the Deputy Mayor, I think that area was set aside to say, except for special events, mobile food vendors were not allowed, and it was there to recognize that we have a number of tenants. We now have a number of tenants. In the past, we didn't have the tenants, somebody else did, but who are in that business. And to me, it was simply opening the door to a very unfair competition that to my mind just didn't belong there. So I can live with removing it and taking it out and re-looking at it the other way, but I would not be supportive other than for special events, such as the car rally or something like that, where they're part of the rally, they're part of that organization. I would not be supporting access to food vehicles in that area.
Okay, Councillor Belanger, is that on this issue?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I guess my question would be is as it relates to fairness across the town. So if you're restricting it on the beachfront because of existing businesses, then what about the distance to a restaurant? Or so, which is just as equally impactful. So I think that we have to make sure that we're not doing something that is open for a legal challenge or be construed as some kind of favoritism.
Is that the final comment on this issue, Councillor?
Yes, if I could. Unless it's changed, we had those rules in place for other chip trucks and food vehicles around. There was a distance restriction from existing restaurants in those areas too, so that hasn't changed. That's already in the bylaw. If it's been changed in the last 4 years, then that needs to be addressed also, I guess. But we did have that provision that had to be, I forget how many meters in that, from people in plazas and so forth.
nothing else on that matter, I'm going to go to Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Worship. I had some similar questions, but they were answered in the first one. So I just want to, we've got this taxi cab and vehicles for hire. And I'm reading it, and so I'm assuming the vehicles for hire are the Ubers and the Lyfts and things like that. And I'm reading a lot of it. I'd like first a little, to quote Councillor Wells, the Coles notes on it. Are they going, like, it seems to imply that Uber can do their thing here. And then the second question that brings up, if we're using that kind of sharing economy, how does that fit to the Airbnbs and things? Because there is a similarity in how a product, it's a different product, but it's an online item. So I'd like to just get the, is Uber and are Uber and Lyft available for people? And is that then going to spin into Airbnb and whatever, VRBO and things like that?
Okay.
Your Worship, this does allow Ubers, Lyfts, anything that falls under electronic platform, because there is no zoning regulations in regards to handling this. They basically have to come into us the same as a taxi driver and obtain a license to operate, as well as their vehicle to operate. However, because they're not out of one base location, they don't require the business company to be licensed. We just require the drivers within the town of Wasaga Beach to be licensed.
Okay.
And then comments on the Airbnb.
Through your Worship, because of the Airbnb, they do fall under the zoning bylaw. Unfortunately, we can't make any amendments to this bylaw after the zoning bylaw, should they allow Airbnbs. However, within our bylaw right now, we restrict them until that comes forward in the zoning department.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other comments? Deputy Mayor Bright?
Sorry, just a question through you. How easy is it to enforce Uber drivers having licenses if we don't know they're here? I mean, they could be based anywhere and they pick up a fare because they're on their way through to, to Barrie. Or would it just be kind of a complaint-based?
Through your Worship, we're able to do both proactively and a reactive basis, so from a complaint basis. However, the app does show other vehicles within the town, does show the license plates of those vehicles. So by access through an MTO system or by simply stating or seeing where they are, we can address them that way and say if you are operating within the town, you need to require a license to do so. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. George?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jeff and I spoke about the taxi bylaw last week and into the early part of this week, and Council may recall last year we had some issues with respect to taxis, the lack of taxis within the community, and I was curious of whether there were barriers in our bylaw, barriers for individuals entering into the business of operating a taxi company. In fact, as council members may recall, one taxi company pulled out and said we're not providing services to Wasaga Beach. So, and the conversation was basically are there areas in the bylaw that could be improved to make it more customer friendly from a taxi cab company standpoint, so they'd be interested in providing those services to the patrons in Wasaga Beach. So Jeff and I had a conversation, and I'd like if your worship permits, maybe Jeff can elaborate in terms of some of the work that he's done with respect to reviewing the taxi bylaw schedule in the bylaw.
Your Worship, thank you. I would actually just ask if Emily, my colleague here, could comment on it. She's spearheaded this project, so I think she would be able to better provide the information here, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. Through your Worship, we'd like to respectfully request to remove Section 5 of the taxi schedule, as it states that you need to provide 24-hour service. We'd like to remove that need for 24-hour service, as we do have requests from additional taxi cab services, but because of this provision in our bylaw, they don't want to operate within the town of Wasaga Beach. Not a service they're able to provide. We'd also like to add that they have, in one of our sections, we state they need a tire on one of their vehicles. We'd like to add that to include readily available access to roadside assistance as another option, as opposed to just having a tire, as some of the taxi cab companies brought forward that this is a safety issue to have one of those on board, and that they have additional access to roadside safety to provide those services to them. We'd also like to remove the term amber in section 9 of that schedule, and then to restate that to be installed in a manner to be visible by all pedestrians and vehicles at any times. So that way we're not putting forward that the signs have to be in the front and the back. They can either be on the roof as well, as long as it's available to all pedestrians and vehicle traffic at any time that it's put forward.
Good.
Sorry, if I just, through your worship, I may add that to the vehicle years, we were looking at all municipalities and their vehicle years on the models. I believe as a department we had come together that we should impose the 8-year limit on a model year. However, they can apply for an exemption through the clerk, whether that be an additional fee or not. And then whether that's granted, they can continue operating with that vehicle until a 12-year limit.
Councillor Belanger?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Just a question on the hours of operation, because I know last year there were a number of complaints that we have bars on our beachfront. They're open late, and yeah, you want to promote safe travel home after people have been drinking. And there were a number of complaints where they couldn't get a taxi or any form of transportation after leaving a bar. So I don't know if there's any provision of how we handle that, whether it be on a rotating basis or whatever, but to have taxis in our community and not to be able to provide that service. And that maybe it doesn't have to be 24-hour, but it should at least coincide to the closing of the bars, I guess.
Your Worship, thank you, Councillor. I can understand the level of concern there was with the amount of taxis that were last year. Unfortunately, there was a moratorium passed in 2014 that wouldn't allow any more taxi cab businesses to apply for licenses. Obviously, with only having one company, they had a minimal amount of resources to respond to the influx of visitors needing accommodations at 2 in the morning. So hopefully, by changing this bylaw, we can get more businesses in town with more taxis, so that we don't have to deal with this problem again. We do have in our bylaw they have to be available. They have to have somebody to be able to dispatch a taxi at any time of the night. But obviously, with the amount of vehicles and visitors needing them, the wait times were quite long. So hopefully we've solved that problem by opening the door to new businesses to come in and work in the Second Beach.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else? George?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question with respect to accessible cabs and the requirement for accessible cabs. How is that covered, and how do we ensure that there is the provision of accessible cabs?
Through the Chair, Your Worship. Thank you, George. That is something I have to do a little bit of research on and report back. Off the top of my head, I don't know the AO requirements for a taxi cab. Do you have any information to touch on that? Okay, so
actually, our deputy clerk is making noises over here. She might know the answer. I could hear her going.
Through your worship, I'd have to brush up on the amount, but in the legislation it does cover that the services must provide, at least by 2025 when all of it's in compliance. Right now some of them are still working based out of regular cars, but they will have to supply a vehicle that is accessible for patrons by that year. So whether or not we head that off now is probably a good idea.
Would council like us to add wording into the bylaw to require that of taxi cab companies?
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, Your Worship, the AODA comes into effect in 2025. To put a pen stroke here that makes it a requirement of a taxi cab company tomorrow, I think is unreasonable. I think we should be clearly moving towards that and saying we want compliance from the municipality and such services by that time. But I think it would, given the number of taxis we have in town, to all of a sudden say, hey, by the way, you have to either take your van and retrofit it or buy a new van, is a huge hit. So we should be clear that we want it to happen, but not a requirement on a pen stroke.
Okay, Councillor Kenny?
I was going to suggest that any movement we can for increasing accessibility in the town is a good move. I do understand where Councillor Foster is coming from with the large time span do we have to, but it would be nice to see somewhere in the bylaw that initiative started. I don't know how you would word it, but you know, maybe somewhere saying, not preferred, but there might be somewhere we can put that in the bylaws so that we can capture those, so that we can provide that service.
Did you want to address that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Your Worship. I don't think we would have put any wording in here that says you would need to do that tomorrow. What I'm referring to is we can put some wording in the bylaw that they are required to have one by the year 2025, and encourage any taxi cabs to take that initiative. We can certainly encourage it through other ways, but to put wording in there that they are required to meet the AODA, we can do that as the schedule it's also a kind of a notice to the business that has that in there, so at least it notifies them by 2025 they're going to have to make some changes. So we can certainly put wording in there.
Is there general support to add that? It's Councillor Boulanger and then you. I thought it would be a simple one there, sorry. Councillor Boulanger, go ahead.
No, that was the same.
That was that? Okay, Councillor Wells?
Well, I'm certainly in favor of the accessibility factor, but I think we also have to take the consideration of why are we reviewing this bylaw in the first place, and that was to try to encourage more taxis to come into Wasaga Beach and to provide service for the community. I think it's fair to say in a bylaw that we would encourage the provision of accessible cabs, but to in any way try to impose it at this point, I think is going to become self-defeating to our first purpose. I mean, here we are trying to encourage cabs to be here, to now say, well, we want you here, but you're going to have to be accessible. I don't think that's going to produce the result we want. Yes, it's definitely required by 2025. We should be encouraging any opportunity to do it ahead of time, but to in any way impose it at this point, I think will just, as I said, self-defeat the purpose for which we're trying to open up this bylaw.
And I think as Dina said, that wasn't the intent, but do we want some wording in there that can be encouraging, that can just confirm that by this date they will have to have it, and then there is no support. You know, is there support for that?
Sorry.
Deputy Mayor Bray?
If they don't have it at that point, would we revoke their business license? That's the only reason I would see having it in there.
Yeah, I would think the municipality has to be compliant with AODA as well by 2025, and if we're allowing that, because it defeats the purpose of that legislation, we should not allow that. So I would think that we would.
So that would be part of their annual inspection.
Yes.
I see it as a heads up to that business. We're letting them know that come this date, you're going to have to do it. It gives them years to work towards it, and if they can get it done beforehand, awesome.
Yeah.
So Deputy Mayor Bray?
Then just further to that, if there's requirements for retail or for restaurants or for, are we building that into all of our bylaws too? I'm just questioning whether AODO is a complete separate legislation. By building it into our bylaw, are we over-complicating our bylaw?
It is quite common to build in AODA requirements into our bylaws. Specifically, our purchasing bylaw would have requirements for contractors regarding AODA. It's not unusual to put AODA compliant wording into our bylaws because we are required to have those same restrictions and those same be compliant as well. So being a different type of legislation, it's not unusual to put that wording into several of our bylaws.
So then my question of this current bylaw in front of us for business licensing, do all categories of business licensing that will be impacted by AODA have a reference in there? And if not, could they?
That's a good question. I think they could. Perhaps rather than in each schedule, that there is a general statement in the body of the bylaw that requires all businesses to be AODA compliant by 2025.
Which then kind of comes full circle to why separate taxis.
Well,
I think what she's saying is put a general one.
Right, for
Rather than
everybody.
forever,
So
yes.
then I wouldn't necessarily think that it needs to be part of the taxi business
Correct.
bylaw.
No, you're looking at making
The
it a general
schedule.
statement for
General
the entire.
in the body of the bylaw rather than in the schedules. It would be in the body of the bylaw.
Okay, Councillor Boulanger?
Thank you, Your Worship. A few questions. Is our own compliance as a municipality. There's been a lot of concern raised whether in general that we're getting enough funding and support to be able to do it ourselves because of the cost involved. And that's been widely by AMO and everyone, all municipalities. So we just have to be careful if we're taking a very strict approach with all businesses but not able to meet our own obligations because of cost. So that's one. But more on the taxi cab companies are, like, is the change in bylaw, are we then going to try to solicit more cabs to be interested to come in, or is this through osmosis, and are we limiting it? Do we want one more company, two more companies? We're not going to limit it, because if we're just looking to add some additional service, then we could, through that process, give more consideration to someone that was compliant. And I guess my only other question is, being a small community and with I don't know what the number of users are that would require that kind of special assistance, but I don't know if there's partnerships that could happen between companies where the companies would agree that there's going to be one vehicle available for that specialized service, or does it have to be a vehicle for every company? Because some of the companies, as was mentioned, are very small.
Through your worship, I don't believe that we've made restrictions to how many companies vehicle for hire or taxi services can be in Wasaga. We've made this bylaw quite simple for any company available or wants to come to Wasaga, able to, as we stated, Ace Cabs is interested in coming to Wasaga. So we have people already coming forward asking when they can be. I mean, they've received this draft bylaw, they've seen it on the agenda, and they've made comments that they wish to move their business to Wasaga as well. We have that interest here.
And if the demand is there and they can make money, they will be here. So, Jeff?
Through your worship, I can also advise council that there is Uber in the area. So Uber is, working in Simcoe County. I was made aware of it the other day through Michael Jennings, but Uber is in the area, and they're trying to get work going in Wasaga Beach.
Thank you, Councillor Kinney, and then we're moving on.
Okay, then just a quick last word on accessibility. If our clerk can do her magic and put it broadly in the bylaw, I think it should address, as our deputy mayor mentioned, all businesses, with the subtle movement towards it, because as a town, I think we want to be the leader in that and show our leadership by putting that in our documents.
Okay, so I'm just going to look around the table for some nodding heads. Are you in support of putting a clause in here as an overall governing thing, not individual, but for the document itself? Okay. Got that?
Your worship, yes, we'll do that, and we'll also seek advice to make sure that that is something that we should be doing. So
okay.
we'll double check with legal and make sure that the clause that we're putting in there meets what we should be doing as a municipality.
Okay. Is there any other questions on the document? It's moved by Councillor Kinney, seconded by Councillor Boulanger. Be it resolved that the Committee of the Whole receive the proposed new business licensing bylaw draft 2 report, and that the bylaw be forwarded to the March 26th council meeting for adoption, incorporating any further changes as directed at this meeting.
Your worship will call for the vote. Councillor Boulanger?
In favor?
Deputy Mayor Bright?
In favor?
Councillor Foster?
In favor.
Councillor Kinney?
In favor.
Councillor Watson?
In favor.
Councillor Wells?
In favor.
Mayor Byfolchi?
In favor?
The vote is 7 in favor and 0 opposed. Motion is carried.
Thank you. Thank you, Emily. Next we have the Assistant Manager of Beachfront Properties, if you wanted to join us, Scott. Did you want to speak to the report?
Yeah, I think if you want me to, I've already spread the report. I won't read it, of course, but if we want to just go through the items that were really on the list that we altered. And this goes, of course, just to our template, our standard template lease, right? There were a few things in it, and I'll quickly touch on. First of all, down under discussion, where I stated that clause 2B, we had to add an expiration date in there. That was more to the point that for the most part, all the standard leases were based in year terms, and going forward, I wasn't writing ones that were just by 1 or 2 or 5 years. They could 1 year, 8 months, 1 year, 9 months. And so that there was clarity on exactly when those leases would expire, I wanted to make sure that was also added in there, not just when it was commencing, but also when it was expiring. The programming fee for 2D, it wasn't ever there stated that it was over and above the base lease, and I put that in there to make sure there was clarity that was going to be on top of what they were paying with all the other additional rents. 3 was added, that is clause 2F. 3, and the fact that we were restructuring how we were going to bill out our tenants, and that was so that we have had a few years under our belt, we know where their general annual hydro was going to be, and therefore, instead of waiting for the bills to come in and billing them after the fact, budgeting ahead of time for it, Treasury would have those numbers and including it all in their post-dated check amounts that they would have issued to us for May, June, July, August, whatever their programming was, and we want verbiage in there to that point. Clause 2F4 was that then when the season had ended, Treasury would then readjust any of the billing that we may have, because it was based on a past year's billing, and if they used any more so, then we would have to bill them for an additional, because we had only approximated what the budget was going to be. So it states here that then, based by November 30th, they would make an adjustment on that. Clause 2G never really had a timeline as to when they needed to have their deposits into us. So I wanted clarity on that. So once all parties have agreed and have signed and we have an accepted lease, deposit will have to be into us within 48 hours. Clause 3 was just and this was all done, of course, with advice from legal counsel, who was here with us today. For the redevelopment clause, just a little more strength to that, if that was to ever be issued. Clause 6 was an additional clause outlining the winter requirements, because all of our buildings, but one down there, it's mandatory that they have to vacate, and so that we can get in to winterize the buildings. And that was more, from our standpoint, clear to our tenants as to why we need to have access to the buildings. Clause 26, 2 additional paragraphs adding and clarifying our position and direction in regards to all abandoned items left on the premises after a lease is terminated or expired. We wanted to make sure we had more direction on what our ability was to do with stuff that was left after a building was left, and stuff still was in it as far as chattels were concerned, and our direction in handling and managing those chattels. And an extra rule that went into Schedule C, and this rule really stemmed from our new rules coming in this year as far as cannabis was concerned, and strengthening our spot with the smoking and what of they could and could not smoke on all the municipal properties and grounds. That was the changes that we did to our standard lease. Then I've got a couple other optional clauses in there that I just wanted you to read through that I've had to use or could be using. And the first one was an exclusivity clause. We do not have many people on the beach that have such. I've been asked by a number of our tenants whether they could have some exclusivity to what they sell or offer for service. One that's always been in place has been Burger King's always had exclusivity on serving fries and burgers, and it's just been in really close proximity with really just its neighboring units there. So, and being one of the leases that I've been working on, that was one you may see in there, but that's exactly a generic clause referencing anything if there were to ever be one. I currently do not have another exclusivity given to any of our other tenants at this point. The last one down at the bottom was a year-round business. We do have at least one unit down there that could be operated year-round, and because our entire standard lease is written with the context of units that are seasonal for single season, need to be winterized, and references timelines to that effect, I needed to have a clause in there just stated for buildings and anybody that chose to want to operate year-round, and more pointedly, it's the Nico's Grill building on 50 mostly, that has that potential, and we've had interest in operating the grounds. So that was that report. I can answer any and all questions if you have any.
Okay, Councillor Wells?
Yeah, I'd like just one question about clause 26, number 8 in your report, item 8 in your report.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to understand. I get the first 10 or 12 lines. Upon re-entry, it's after it's expired or terminated, and the abandonment, any of the furnishings left are essentially what it's saying are the property of the landlord to be disposed of, and credits go to the tenant, and over and above what they owe us, any credit goes to the tenant. And then the very last line is further agreed and acknowledged that any property found in the leased premises by the landlord at the time of such re-entry, meaning terminated or expired, is deemed to be the property of the tenant, unless the tenant advises otherwise. I didn't get the connection between our seizing the property versus it's the property of the tenant.
You just follow along. So the property, there are chattels that we're dealing with, right? So nothing here is a fixture. If it's deemed a fixture, it's ours from that moment on, anyways, right? And to that point is that if they came in and they didn't like light fixtures that were in, they changed the light fixtures. Those light fixtures, by definition, become ours, anyways. They're part of the structure, right? But for the chattels continue to be the tenant's property. Although we are governing what we're going to do with them at that point, it's only to liquidate them to recover the costs that are outstanding, right? And that's why the verbiage is then that anything above and beyond what is outstanding will still in turn go back to the tenant.
I got that. It's just that very last line I'm still finding just confusing, that we are saying that it has become the property of the landlord, so to speak, and then the last line says no, it's still the property of the tenant. Somehow it just isn't flowing for me.
Would that be like something that they were leasing, maybe, that they don't own?
I think that's the correct intention. Thank you, Your Worship. It's meant to govern if something goes on. You wouldn't be able to know necessarily if you had a defaulting tenant whether something that was left behind belonged to somebody else, not the tenant. So there's a presumption added here that it is theirs, not a supplier's. It's not on lease. It belongs to the tenant, so that you at least don't have to worry about the third party. So that's the intention.
Okay, thank you.
Do you need an assistant like I got that?
Gladly.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Watson?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just looking through the firstly, I'd like to commend Scott and working with the legal team to come up with a template and a professional lease. That's been a criticism I've had of this whole process. It seemed to be all over the place and not doing it professionally in some instances, so I commend you for doing that. I'm trying to look at a schedule of payments here, and my experience having been very involved down there leasing units prior to our fire is if someone is going year to year a longer term lease, all I'm seeing here at the moment, unless I'm missing it, is that they're to provide you with some post-dated checks.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the issue down there is chasing people for rent. So I guess if someone's only taking a 1-year lease, what kind of deposit are you getting before the May 24th weekend to get them in there? And my experience has been that they then have the May 24th long weekend, then they would have the July weekend, and then the balance of that rent should be due and payable after the July 1st weekend, so that they've now got the rest of the summer to continue. But we as a town, or any landlord, would have all their payment up front, so we avoid the fact that through mid-August and it's rainy, they decide to leave and they sold little monies. So I'm not sure if there's a provision for doing that. On a longer term lease, are you staggering the payments over a 12-month period for someone, or are you front-end loading a little bit during the season and doing something a little later? Again, I'm looking for people walking from these properties and us paying legal fees and going forward. So it's always an issue, and the more we can do to protect ourselves of getting that money and working with the tenants, that would make me happy, and I think make the town happy.
Yeah, so deposit first. deposit now is in here, and it's 25% of whatever your base lease is. Okay, so if your lease is 30 grand, then I need a deposit of 7,500, and that'll be within 48 hours of acceptance. Okay, it's a security deposit. Under G, so 2G is where our security deposit is. And as far as payments are, there's 4 payments now. Everybody's on a standard program. May 1st, June 1st, July 1st, and August 1st. So once we package all your costs up, if the hydro's coming through the town, if we're billing for the hydro, garbage collection, everything gets totaled up. It gets then quartered, and that is what your postage checks will be for May 1st, June 1st, July 1st, and August 1st. So to your point, August 1st is the last one. Keeping in mind, we've taken a security deposit that is 25% of whatever that base lease was written for, and we have that already held in trust.
Okay, back to that. That sounds a lot better. I'm happy this process.
Also, through your worship, I come from that same background in history as George does. So.
Any other questions? Okay, I was hoping you could address, Scott, on page number 4, it speaks to the, it starts on page 3, options to renew. It's 3.2.
Yep.
And it speaks to the 5 years. So yourself, the CAO, and I had a discussion about that the other day. You know, the council has been clear that we would like to see development happening down there, and my concern is always that we are having people sign a lease that says, hey, you can lease for another 5 years kind of thing, because I don't want it to look misleading if there's intentions to get development going down there. So can you address why the 5 years is still there?
Certainly, of course, this was drafted much earlier than even that in this report done last week, of course, so this has all been quite fluid and changing, and you're right to that point. This is one clause that needs to be probably rejigged, whether we choose to just leave it the way it is, and I make that amendment continually for the few more that I do to this point. But this is first of all, from the timeline of it, will certainly need to be addressed and shortened. Secondly, to your point in that clause, the opportunity in there where the tenant has the opportunity to renew, this one shows it's quite lengthy. It's 12 months before and then 8 months. My opinion would have that shortened towards maybe 60 days at the most, and certainly then maybe even taking some teeth out of this so that it's both parties need to be mutually agreeable upon.
And I think that's the term that we were speaking about the other day.
That's correct. So, and that's been just a recent meeting, so this is something that we will certainly touch on, I think, for any of the leases going forward. I've made note of that already.
Any other questions or comments? Okay.
So if we are going to make further adjustments, I think this motion, if I remember correctly, is accepting it as presented here, but if we're going to be making further adjustments, is this, and I don't want to delay things because obviously it's important that this get done. So I guess I'm saying, am I approving it as I read it, or am I approving it with what I understand to be the changes you're asking for?
So I'm going to read it, then our clerk can tell us if we need to add something to it. So the way it reads now is that the Committee of Whole received this report for information and approved the changes to the town's standard lease, along with all additional optional standard clauses that can be used when required in completing any lease of beachfront property. So for instance, this 5-year that we just discussed, do we need to change this in order for that to happen?
I would say as amended, because these, I'm assuming that the recommendation is including the changes in your report. It's not that have been, and so we're making additional changes.
Well, the recommendations, like under the discussion and optional clauses, that does not cover the 5-year comment.
Now, keeping in mind, if I may, is that this is just our standard template. So to each tenant that I bring to the table and address and change, if I make any changes to this has to come back to you for approval. Anything that I change regardless, that would be one that I would be changing going forward every time anyway. So you would see that change every time.
Okay, understood. George?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with the clerk in terms of amending the motion to put as amended, but to assist members of council when things like this have happened in the past, when the bylaw comes forward to council next week, we'll do a brief explanatory note on the cover, just outlining the changes that have been made from the discussion today to the bylaw being presented next week.
Okay. Okay. So it's moved by Councillor Kinney, seconded by Councillor Boulanger. Be it resolved, the Committee of the Whole receive the report for information and approve the changes to the town's standard lease along with all additional optional standard clauses that can be used when required in completing any lease of beachfront property as amended.
We'll call for the vote. Councillor Boulanger?
In favor?
Deputy Mayor Bray?
In favor?
Councillor Foster?
In favor.
Councillor Kinney?
In favor.
Councillor Watson?
In favor.
Councillor Wells?
In favor.
Mayor Byfolchi?
In favor.
The vote is 7 in favor and 0 opposed. The motion is carried.
Thank you. Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, guys.
It is next, moved by Councillor Boulanger, seconded by Councillor Kinney. Be it resolved, the Committee of the Whole recommends that Council support the Director, Recreation, Events and Facilities recommendation to allow the Nancy Island Lions Club to host a spring fertilizer sale to take place in the Recplex parking lot on April 27th and 28th, 2019. Any discussion?
Call for the vote. Councillor Boulanger?
In favor?
Deputy Mayor Bray?
In favor?
Councillor Foster?
In favor?
Councillor Kinney?
In favor.
Councillor Watson?
In favor.
Councillor Wells?
In favor.
Mayor Byfolchi?
In favor?
The vote is 7 in favor and 0 opposed. The motion
Thank you,
is
Chris.
carried.
That was an easy one, right?
That was.
That was easy.
We'll get you next time.
Two long ones.
Next is a motion dealing with the after-hours medical clinic, and it's moved by Councillor Boulanger, seconded by Councillor Kinney. The Committee of the Whole received this report for information. Is there any clarification or information required on this, or anything you wanted to add, George?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just that there is a companion report, which much more detail in terms of personal information and whatnot that was circulated as part of Council's confidential package.
Councillor Foster?
And your worship, on this item and the next one, because they're not dealing with the agreement between the town and the community health center, I believe I have no conflict of interest. We're talking about that and the relationship with the doctor, so that's why I didn't declare. Just
Okay, thank you for that.
So we'll call for the vote. Councillor Boulanger?
In favor?
Deputy Mayor Bray?
In favor?
Councillor Foster?
in favor.
Councillor Kinney?
In favor.
Councillor Watson?
In favor.
Councillor Wells?
In favor.
Mayor Byfolchi?
In favor?
The vote is 7 in favor and 0 opposed. The motion is carried.
And it's moved by Councillor Watson, seconded by Councillor Wells. Be it resolved, the Committee of the Whole recommend to Council that it amend the memorandum of understanding with physicians staffing the after-hours medical clinic to increase the standby fee for physicians to $350 per shift in circumstances where there are 6 patients or less seen per shift. Any discussion on that? Councillor Boulanger?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I just had one question that in a standard agreement now in any other health center, like if we had a weather event or something like that, where people just didn't come out to the clinic or canceled, would the doctors not just be in a situation where that particular night they didn't do as well? So I guess I felt there maybe should be a provision. It's one thing if we're just opening up new for a night and our community doesn't understand that that this service might be available that night and it takes a few weeks to build. But if it was a significant weather event or some other issue that stopped people from getting there, I just don't know if we should be paying a premium for the doctor, because if they were in any other clinic, they would have to deal with it.
Well, and I think that the pilot runs out before winter comes, so I personally am not worried about a bad weather day, but did you want to speak to that?
Thank you. Excuse me. The intent of the amendment was to deal with exactly the second part of it, with the ramp up in certain days where the patient volume isn't there. We did have, excuse me, we did have a situation in the recent past where the clinic was canceled due to a weather event, and in that case it was just canceled. The call was made in the afternoon, and it was just the clinic didn't happen that evening. And I would imagine if that were the case in a similar circumstance, that would happen. The call would be made early enough that everybody would know that the clinic's closed. We would advertise, publish, make everybody aware.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? Okay.
We'll call for the Councillor Boulanger?
In favor?
Deputy Mayor Bray?
In favor?
Councillor Foster?
In favor.
Councillor Kinney?
In favor.
Councillor Watson?
In favor.
Councillor Wells?
In favor, sorry.
Mayor Byfolchi?
In favor?
The vote is 7 in favor and 0 opposed. The motion is carried.
And next is moved by Councillor Foster, seconded by Councillor Watson. The Committee of the Whole received a request from Fram Building Group for reimbursement of expenses, and that committee provide direction to the CEO per the discussion in closed session. So we do have something in our agenda here, but we also have something in camera that we will be discussing, and if there is any direction, it would come after the in-camera session, correct? Okay. Did you have something, Deputy Mayor Bray?
Just a question. So there's a list of the expenses attached to the public agenda. If we have questions about those, do we ask in public or do we ask in camera?
Could I ask Michael that question?
It's certainly an agenda item in open session. I think any councillor is entitled to ask questions, but without somebody to guide that discussion, it may be premature, depending on the nature of the line item. I have not looked at that.
So if we have our in-camera session and there's something that somebody wanted to discuss, they could, after that session, after having some advice,
Quite correct.
they would know whether they could share that or not.
Quite correct.
Does that make
Okay,
sense?
we'll wait. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That.
We'll call for the vote. Councillor Boulanger?
In favor?
Deputy Mayor Bray?
In favor?
Councillor Foster?
In favor?
Councillor Kinney?
In favor.
Councillor Watson?
In favor.
Councillor Wells?
In favor.
Mayor Byfolchi?
In favor?
Vote of 7 in favor and 0 opposed. Motion is carried.
Next is moved by Councillor Watson, seconded by Councillor Foster. The pursuant to Section 239(2)(a), (b), (d), (e), (f), and (h) of the Municipal Act 2001 as amended, the next portion of the Committee of the Whole meeting of March 21st, 2019 be closed to the public to discuss the security of property of the municipality, personal matters about identifiable individual, labor relations or employee negotiations, advice of the solicitor-client privileged, litigation or potential litigation, and information explicitly supplied in confidence to the municipality. And I'll just note that Councillor Wells, you have conflict here and will be leaving during that portion of the in-camera.
Thank you, Your Worship. We'll call for the vote. Councillor Boulanger?
In favor?
Deputy Mayor Bray?
In favor?
Councillor Foster?
In favor?
Councillor Kinney?
In favor.
Councillor Watson?
In favor.
Councillor Wells?
In favor.
Mayor Byfolchi?
In favor?
Vote of 7 in favor and 0 opposed. Motion is carried.
do that. I have motions for all of this. Yeah. I think I'll just leave it now. Yeah. Moved by Councillor Watson, seconded by Councillor Foster. Be it resolved that Committee of the Whole confirm direction in closed session pertaining to matters relating to a bylaw and enforcement.
We'll call for the vote. Councillor Boulanger?
In favor?
Deputy Mayor Bray?
In favor?
Councillor Foster?
In favor.
Councillor Kinney?
In favor.
Councillor Watson?
In favor.
Councillor Wells?
In favor.
Mayor Fulton in favor. Vote of 7 in favor and 0 opposed. The motion is carried.
It's moved by Councillor Foster, seconded by Councillor Watson. Be it resolved the Committee of the Whole confirm direction in closed session pertaining to the Assistant Beachfront Manager's report on the proposed lease agreements.
We'll call for the vote. Councillor Boulanger?
In favor?
Deputy Mayor Bray?
In favor?
Councillor Foster?
In favor.
Councillor Kinney?
In favor.
Councillor Watson?
In favor.
Councillor Wells?
In favor.
Mayor Fulton in favor. Vote of 7 in favor and 0 opposed. The motion is carried.
Moved by Councillor Kinney, seconded by Councillor Watson. Be it resolved that Committee of the Whole confirm direction in closed session pertaining to the Director of Legislative Services and Clerk, Main Street property matter.
We'll call for the vote. Councillor Boulanger?
In favor?
Deputy Mayor Bray?
In favor?
Councillor Foster?
In favor.
Councillor Kinney?
In favor.
Councillor Watson?
In favor.
Councillor Wells?
In favor.
Mayor Fulton in favor. The vote is 7 in favor and 0 opposed. The motion is carried.
Moved by Councillor Watson, seconded by Councillor Kinney. Be it resolved that Committee of the Whole confirm direction in closed session pertaining to the Manager of Human Resources report on a contract matter.
We'll call for the vote. Councillor Boulanger?
In favor?
Deputy Mayor Bray?
In favor?
Councillor Foster?
In favor.
Councillor Kinney?
In favor.
Councillor Watson?
favor.
Councillor Wells?
In favor.
Mayor Fulton in favor. 7 in favor and 0 opposed. The motion is carried.
Moved by Councillor Kinney, seconded by Councillor Watson. Be it resolved that Committee of the Whole confirm direction in closed session pertaining to the Manager of Human Resources report regarding the compensation review. And I will note Councillor Wells has stepped away from the table for this one.
We'll call for the vote. Councillor Boulanger?
In favor?
Deputy Mayor Bray?
In favor?
Councillor Foster?
In favor.
Councillor Kinney?
In favor.
Councillor Watson?
In favor.
Mayor Fulton in favor. The vote is 6 in favor and 0 opposed. The motion is carried.
It's moved by Councillor Kinney, seconded by Councillor Boulanger. Be it resolved that Committee of the Whole confirm direction in closed session pertaining to the CAO's medical clinic confidential report.
We'll call for the vote. Councillor Boulanger?
In favor?
Deputy Mayor Bray?
In favor?
Councillor Foster?
In favor.
Councillor Kinney?
In favor.
Councillor Watson?
In favor.
Councillor Wells?
In favor.
Mayor Fulton in favor. The vote is 7 in favor and 0 opposed. The motion is carried.
And it's moved by Councillor Foster, seconded by Councillor Kinney. Be it resolved that Committee of the Whole confirm direction in closed session pertaining to the CAO's report regarding FRAM LOI request for reimbursement of costs.
We'll call for the vote. Councillor Boulanger?
In favor?
Deputy Mayor Bray?
In favor?
Councillor Foster?
In favor.
Councillor Kinney?
In favor.
Councillor Watson?
In favor.
Councillor Wells?
In favor.
Mayor Fulton in favor. The vote is 7 in favor and 0 opposed. The motion is carried.
Thank you, everyone. We are adjourned. You.